let's talk about radical Islam for a minute, and maybe we can use that as a entry point into discussing the relationship between religion and politics more broadly.
Yes.
And because I would really like to do that. So the first issue is, it's interesting to me that there are a variety of forward-looking leaders in the Muslim world who, for example, have been pushing forward the Abraham Accords, normalization of relations with Israel, but even more importantly, the establishment of truly productive relations. So it's obviously that within the broader confines of the Islamic world, the possibility for peace and productive peace exists.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So now then the next issue, I'm trying to work this out in the West in general. So, there's always a percentage of truly bad actors in any population. Eh?
Yes.
So the psychological data indicates that the prevalence of pure psychopathy in the population is, to be conservative, let's say 3%. So those are seriously bad actors. And we want to say a few things about the psychopathic types. Okay, so they're Machiavellian. They only use their language to manipulate for their own benefit, right? They're parasitic predators. That makes them psychopathic. They're narcissistic, which means they want undeserved attention and will do anything to get it. And to top it all off, because that's not enough, they have strong proclivity towards sadism, which is positive delight in the unnecessary suffering of others. Okay, so these are bad actors. Now, the question is, how do they operate? And we actually know the answer to that. They like to hide behind a mask of victimization, because that's very effective. So the psychopathic types are always claiming that they're the victims and that there are people they can identify as oppressors, and the moral thing is to stand with them. But the other thing they do is hijack the political agenda on both sides. So, for example, the psychopaths will use compassion to manipulate the left, and they'll use free speech issues to manipulate the right. But they don't care, because they're not political at all. What they are is out for themselves 100%. And then what even makes the situation more dire is that the psychological literature indicating that the psychopathic types can be rehabilitated is dismal, to say the least.
They can't.
It's
That's
no.
good to know.
No is the simple answer. And again, I'm speaking, let's say, of the 1% of criminals who are responsible for 65% of the crimes. It's not corrigible.
Okay.
Okay. Now, a person who deviates from the path of law and order and makes a mistake once, that's a whole different issue.
But I don't think that this is the explanation to what's going on in the Islamic world. Because while there are psychopaths, like Saddam Hussein was a psychopath, definitely, and Yahya Sinwar was a psychopath, I'm not sure other radical Islam leaders are necessarily psychopaths. I think they truly believe that the world needs to act according to Sharia law. Well, this is what I'm trying to untangle. It's like, it's such a difficult thing, because you have, on the one hand, the obvious fact that there's much movement in the Islamic world to establish peace with Israel, right, and to move their populations forward in a productive manner. But then you have this core, and separating out the religious claims from the manipulation of the religious claims by the self-interested psychopaths. That's a very difficult thing to manage. I think what undermines this case is the numbers. I don't have the data regarding what percentage of Muslims support radical Islam. I'm not saying they engage in terrorism, but they support. My hunch is a fairly high percentage, and we can't just attribute.
Are they better? Okay, I'm going to push back slightly, because
fine. We're
I'm
debating.
wondering, is that also because it's easier for the psychopathic, self-interested manipulators to manipulate a comparatively undereducated population and to get away with their claims that really what they're doing is abiding by the doctrines of the one true religion?
Right.
Because when you're dealing with a population whose fundamental ideational structure is encapsulated within a single religious viewpoint, it's a lot easier for the bad actors to manipulate that.
So they definitely use this First of all, to deflect all their incompetence.
Yes, definitely.
But that doesn't mean you're a psychopath. It just means, you're a cynical person that you want to continue governing. I've seen lots of people do that. And I think I'll tell you what I think about how we need to go about fighting radical Islam. And this is something that evolved. I think, especially in the case of Gaza, everyone asks me, but Hamas is an ideology and you can't kill an ideology. That's half true. I agree that there's no point in trying to persuade people, don't be radical, don't be Hamas supporters. Hamas enjoys a great popular support in the Palestinian population, about 2/3. But there is a way to get them away from Hamas by defeating Hamas. I'll give you an analogy. You probably know way better than me. Let's a hypothesis. Had we done a poll in Nazi Germany in December of 1944, right? Everyone knew where it's going. My belief, I have no basis for this, is that a vast majority of Germans still supported the Nazi ideology.
It's likely, very likely, yeah.
Now, within several years after the war, we had a new Germany. What happened was there was a step before persuading their hearts and minds that Nazism is bad. There was something way more important, that Nazism is gone. Mm-hmm. So first defeat Hamas, first defeat the Nazis. And so it's no longer a matter of whether it's good or bad. It's gone. It's gone. We killed them. They're done. Now get on with life. And only then, I think, I'm asking you actually, psychologically, can the individual open his mind to hear other arguments?
I think there is. Well, first of all, we hope so.
That's what I think that we need to do. We need to defeat Hamas and then begin changing the hearts and minds.
Well, I think the historical precedents that you outlined are the correct ones. The same thing happened in Japan, and very rapidly, right? And very thoroughly. I mean, Japan went from that warlike state that it was to a very peaceful and productive society overnight. Well, and you can say exactly the same thing about Germany. So,
yeah.
And thank God for that. All right. So there's good historical precedent. Yes. Whether that's the relevant case, that's a different issue, but it's not unreasonable.
Happened. We have no success in sustainable Arab democracies. Mm-hmm. It's just a fact. You look, none of the countries in the Middle East, even the stable ones, are democracies. And it gets you thinking that maybe we're trying to implement something to square a circle. And maybe there needs to be some sort of hybrid. I'll give you an example. One of the great leaders today, I believe, is Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed of the Emirates. He's a remarkable guy. And are the Emirates a full-blown democracy? No, they aren't. But is he doing good? Is the vector a good one? Absolutely. And so we have to be creative about these sort of things, not impose our values and structures where it won't necessarily succeed.
As a spouse, a parent, or a leader, people count on you. But if you're constantly tired, unfocused, and just not feeling like yourself, how can you show up the way they need you to? That's where Merrick Health comes in. Merrick is a premier health optimization platform that uses comprehensive lab work, not guesswork, to uncover what's really going on in your body. Hormones, thyroid inflammation, nutrient levels, the markers that matter. Their expert clinical teams build a personalized, research-backed plan just for you, whether it's lifestyle changes, supplements, or prescription treatments. When you know what's going on inside, you can lead with clarity, show up with energy, and stay sharp for your family, your team, and yourself. Head over to merrickhealth.com and use code Peterson for 10% off to join their guided optimization program with your personal medical team. That's merrickhealth.com, code Peterson. Stop guessing, start leading, and start with Merrick Health.
Well, we don't. This gets us farther down the religious rabbit hole, too. We don't know what the grounds for democracy are.
Right.
Democracy emerged in its modern form as an offshoot of Judeo-Christian culture. And I think you can make a strong case that, and I've felt this particularly from studying the thinkers of the Scottish Enlightenment is that once the presumptions of Judeo-Christian morality are axiomatic, it's possible to erect a democracy that's functional and stable.
That's very interesting.
There are preconditions for liberal individualism. And
Yes.
one of the preconditions is that your society is basically peaceful and everybody trusts one another, right? And then now you can all go out there and be individual and liberal and vary in your,
right.
in your creative ways, and that'll work. It isn't fluke, obviously, that there aren't functional democracies in the Arab world. Now, why there aren't functional democracies are a hard thing to pull off. And there's many places in the world that don't have
functional democracies are hard in America and in Israel as well.
Yes, exactly.
well,
and they've had a hard time really getting themselves going in South America, for example. And like countries that were settled by England tend to have functional democracies, and countries that were settled by any other country, France, Spain, Portugal.
And Israel's a remarkable miracle in that sense, because the Jews had been in exile in diaspora for 2,000 years. They didn't have, we were organized in small communities, not as a nation. And to have these folks come from all around the world back to our homeland and form a stable democracy, it in itself is a miracle.
That's for sure. Well,
but when you think about it, it makes sense, because Judaism, as it evolved in the diaspora and previously in the two previous states we had in Israel, was a very democratic and open for debate society.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something.
Open for debate.
Debate is at the core of Judaism. When you have the Orthodox Jews study Talmud essentially, people don't know what I'm about this. Talmud is sort of the law code of Judaism, but the Talmud's not about the bottom line. It's not a book of rules. It's you can fill a library with it. What it is, it's debates between rabbis. They debate the most arcane, strange topics, but no one cares about the bottom line. You learn to debate. It's a very intellectually challenging thing. It's like a combination of mathematics and logic, but it's all about debate. And then 400 years later, rabbis in Europe continued or in North Africa continued the debate.
Discussion.
It's layers of debate, and the method of study in Judaism is also unique. It's called chevruta. Here's how they taught Jews for millennia. Two guys sit one next to another and learn together and debate. That's what they do. You don't sit, the structure was not a teacher in a classroom. And we've been doing this for thousands of years. And I believe, by the way, that's part of the secret of the startup nation, is that we're such a debating people. At its best, it brings you innovations. I remember in my startup company, we were yelling at each other the whole time. Anyone who came into my company heard screaming between the VP R&D but it was positive. At its worst, it can tear apart societies when the debate is not for the right reasons.
Yeah, well, so that means upward-oriented debate. Well, it seems to me that that implies that maybe one of the things that the Jewish state and Christian or Judeo-Christian democracies have in common is something like a conceptualization or an embodiment of the logos, right? The idea that the way that you make progress forward is through thought, and that's mediated by speech, and that speech has to be free, and it can be intense.
Yes.
And so
think about that. The most respected person in the community for those 2,000 years was the rabbi. And the rabbi was typically the smartest guy. He was best at studying Talmud. That's how the most famous rabbis like Maimonides, who was also a physician, and the first and foremost, they were the best at study. And by the way, they also got the best, their children got the best marriages of usually the most wealthy, and that created a very positive cycle, a genetic cycle, which made for very smart folks all across the Jewish world. The good thing is that rabbis get married and have kids. Priests do not. And so you take a really smart guy, but then he doesn't have descendants. Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah.
By the way, in Israel today, Israel is the only Western country in the world with positive demographic
Right. That's a remarkable
growth.
thing too.
It is.
Yeah, I wonder why. Why do you think?
I don't know.
You don't know.
I don't know. I have all kinds of ideas. By the way, people think it's only because of the ultra-Orthodox, because they do have a lot of kids. But even if you carve them out, the secular are also net positive. You need 2.1 to retain a population. We're at about 2.3 with the secular, and all in all at 3 kids per family. I don't know exactly why.
Yeah, well, that's a real mystery. I mean, it seems to indicate something, it's a wild hypothesis that there's a certain degree of existential threat that might optimally facilitate the desire to have children, right?
I agree. I think that's part of it.
You can be more cavalier, I suppose, about life in general. Like, one of the things I noticed about being in Jerusalem, I've been there a couple of times, is the intensity of life. It's unbelievably intense place.
Jerusalem is intense, yeah.
And people, in some ways, people are conducting themselves as if tomorrow is uncertain. Now, they're wealthy and they have opportunity, but tomorrow is still uncertain. And I wonder if, Hemingway said at one point that every generation needed a war to sort out what was important, and sufficient existential threat might play that role of focusing. And
you're on to a very salient point. And because October 7th shook us. I was born in 72, a year before Yom Kippur War, which was sort of the last time that we thought existentially that we were at a threat. So I cannot remember it. And my childhood in Mount Carmel in Haifa was very similar, by the way, to the mountains over here. Was a very standard and regular Western childhood. And my whole generation grew up taking Israel for granted. We did not feel that there's any existential threat. October 7th shook that complacency. We now understand it again, what's evolved from October 7th. By the way, this is a fascinating insight that not many people are aware of. On October 7th, basically there's 2 stories. One is a massive institutional failure of the state of Israel on our most fundamental objective, which is to protect Jews from pogroms, from a long massacre and Jews being helpless. We've always had terror, but a terror attack usually wraps itself up within 5 seconds to 5 minutes. It's done. This was different. So it was a huge failure of intelligence, of operations, and the government melted down for the month subsequent. So that's the bad news. But the amazing news is that we discovered that the younger generation of Israel, boys and girls, let's say from 18 to 40, are incredibly strong, tough, courageous, willing to sacrifice their lives. Let me illustrate this. On that morning of Sabbath, October 7th, as the news percolated, thousands of Israelis, boys and girls, got in their cars, civilians, and drove down to the Gaza area to fight and defend people they've never met, their brothers and sisters that they've never met. Many of them lost their lives while doing it. That is the supreme level of courage. I was in Manhattan on September 11th. That's where my headquarters were. I remember the buildings on fire, and there was a river of people running away to the north or walking very quickly to the north. Only the firefighters went south, which is okay. People move from harm's way. But this younger generation on October 7th just went and fought, sometimes with their bare hands, sometimes with a pistol, against machine guns. And these boys and girls are the toughest we've had. And when I compare them to boys and girls of their age, let's say 21-year-olds, let's say here in America, I do a lot of universities, and I see the nonsense that they're being fed with or the way they're being developed versus our kids. It's not that I would choose this. It's a horrible thing to have to fight wars, but we are developing, I coined the term, a nation of lions, a courageous younger generation, tough, resilient, being embedded with values of work ethics, working as a team, dedicating yourself, spending 10 months fighting terrorists. And then I see what kids here, they need the right pronoun, otherwise they're triggered, and they need a safe space and microaggressions and all this nonsense, which
Neurotic suffering.
builds very feeble people. Because I have a newsflash, the world out there is a tough world, and you need strong kids. And the reason I'm so optimistic about the next 50 years of Israel, this is our finest generation. You remember American GIs came back from Europe, and they carried America for its best 50 years, from 45 to, let's say, 2000. These boys and girls, including my own son and daughter, my oldest son, Yoni, he's now joined the army in a combat unit, but he was still a civilian this year. You know what he did the entire year? He volunteered with children of evacuees and went to do farming because we didn't have hands to do it. My daughter was volunteering in farming, but they're typical. They're not unique. And I'm so darn proud of them. And I know that year of farming or fighting is developing them so much more than any university. So by the time they're going to enter the civilian world after army, we are manufacturing these super men and women who are going to carry Israel forward. Innovation, self-reliance, responsibility. They're going to be amazing.